For me, it really was about this picking up of the gauntlet of my deep interest in my origin story into minimalism, how that folds into Blackness, how that folds into time and music history and art history and Black history. So it's a bit about a timeline in a sense.
Hey everyone, on this week's episode, I'm joined in the studio by the artist Jennie C. Jones, who currently has 2 exhibitions on view through February 1st, 2026 at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation in St. Louis, Align When Broken Begins Again, which features a selection of new and existing works, and Other Octaves, a group show she curated of works by 1960s and 70s era artists who have been formative to her practice. You may also recognize Jennie as the artist of this year's rooftop installation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, for which she created 3 monumental red metal sound sculptures, collectively titled Ensemble, that comprise geometric interpretations of historical instruments. Widely celebrated for her abstract works in painting, sculpture, and sound art, Jennie's practice is largely informed and inspired by minimalism and color field painting, as well as by jazz and avant-garde music. Often incorporating architecture into her art, she places a particular focus on the perception of sound in space. She also pays particular attention to pauses in between moments and breaks in music. Time, as you'll hear, is central to her work, which in addition to the Pulitzer and the Met, has been shown at New York's Guggenheim Museum, where in 2022 she had a solo exhibition in the Frank Lloyd Wright Rotunda, and at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C., where in 2013 she had her first major institution solo show. On the episode, we talk about Jennie's complicated across-time relationship with the work of Ellsworth Kelly, the art of putting together a playlist, her elevation of various undersung or little-known Black artists and musicians through her work, what listening as a conceptual practice looks like in action, and her deep love of all things analog. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references from the Mason's patrimonial collection, as well as from private loans. From dramatic necklaces depicting rockets in flight to gem-encrusted pendants inspired by distant nebulae, to watches with intricate mechanisms that trace the transit of planetary bodies, Cosmic Splendor features nearly 70 astrological, celestial, and mythological creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos. Among the enchanting universe of pieces on display are a yellow gold and ruby moon pendant from 1969 that's a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing, a yellow gold zodiac bracelet from 1973, and 2021 double galaxies clips, characterized by their evocative swirling designs. These works trace the stylistic evolution and the level of expertise that the high jewelry maison, founded in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, has developed throughout its history. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, here's my conversation with Jennie. Hi, Jennie. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Hi.
So I wanted to start today's conversation with your exhibitions, two that are currently on view at the Pulitzer Art Foundation in St. Louis, one of which, Jennie C. Jones, Align When Broken Begins Again, features a selection of your new and existing works, paintings, sculptures, works on paper, sound pieces. The second of which, Other Octaves, curated by Jennie C. Jones, includes works you've selected by artists including Carmen Herrera, Agnes Martin, who I know is a hero of yours, Martin Purrier, Alma Thomas, and Mildred Thompson. Let's start with the phrase, "A line when broken begins again." How did you land on that title for the show? What does that phrase mean to you?
That phrase came from a piece of prose writing, actually, that's in the book I published about 2 years ago with Radius. It was kind of my first big monogram. I have these fragments of text that often get pulled from my sketchbook writing that I swear no one will ever see but me. And then there's these little juicy things that kind of slip out. And for me, it really was about this picking up of the gauntlet of my deep interest in my origin story into minimalism, how that folds into Blackness, how that folds into time and music history and art history and Black history. So it's a bit about, overtly about a timeline in a sense, about like when things break and start again, but also on a microscopic level in music notation, in the break, like Fred Moten's In the Break, or the spaces in between. And how do you begin again after you have this break or this space in between? Are you continuing on, or are you shifting your register? So I love working with metaphors, and I love taking these things in a lot of different directions. But slowly, some of the writings have been dripping out into titles and into other projects.
Yeah, I read your Radius book, and I feel like there are texts in it that one could read as poems. I mean, maybe fragments is another form of it. I mean, they're notations, perhaps, all of the above.
Yeah.
But they're really beautiful, and I feel like they're reflective of almost like the stream of – I felt like I was being inside the artist's head a little bit reading those.
For sure, which makes me feel slightly insane and slightly like, oh, I do make sense when I'm like muttering to myself in the studio. And then I'm like, I should write that down. And actually, there's a poetic juice there still in those intimate, private kind of process moments.
So this exhibition features your first indoor freestanding sculpture.
Yes.
And it's called Point of Perspective, which engages Ellsworth Kelly's blue-black wall sculpture that's permanently installed in the same gallery.
Yes.
Being in dialogue with Ellsworth Kelly, in a way, this is like such a full circle moment for you, I feel like. Like, could you speak about this across-time relationship with Kelly's art? From your studies at the School of Art Institute of Chicago to your Hirshhorn Museum exhibition, 2013, like how have you processed your Ellsworth Kelly time here? I mean, this is pretty fascinating. He was an artist who I think we could say is one of the more pivotal early art moments for you, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, in a push-pull kind of way. I've written about that. It's going to be also some of my writings that are more critical are in the forthcoming Pulitzer book, collected handfuls of essays. And I wrote about Ellsworth and Art in America. Oh, my God, I can't remember what year that was, 2010 maybe? I don't know. Referencing that shift that happened for me at the Art Institute of Chicago when his pieces were permanently installed, and hence the removal of a variety of other artworks. Not specific artists that I was like, I can't believe they took that down. But it was just that one artist took over such a prominent amount of space. And that was when the museum was such that you had to walk through the museum to get to class, which was the cornerstone of that school, which is... We won't unpack the shifts and changes in art school mentality in academia. But yeah, so I've written about this anger mixed with sort of a passionate jealousy that he had the freedom to sort of make the work that I wanted to make at the time in the 90s. I was interested in surfaces and monochromatic work and afraid to sort of figure out what that meant in 1992. 91. It's the peak of multicultural discourse. And so there was a real sort of critique that has evolved since then, I think, of doing, in this case with the Pulitzer, literally a dance of eclipsing or playing with what it means. But also over the years, my work has so pointedly been about art school, about deconstructing my relationship to art history. Where am I in these timelines? versus avoiding it completely or pretending like I'm not a victim of art school. Like so many people with master's degrees just don't really want to talk about that part of how that enters the room, how that enters the studio, and how it enters your psyche. So when I walked into the Pulitzer in there, I knew that piece was there, but I didn't really understand fully until I was in that Ondo space how dominant it was. And I have a picture I keep saying I'm going to post on Insta where I'm literally doing the thing where you hold your thumb up and you squint one eye and try to take something out of the the vista in front of you. And we cut pieces of paper to scale, and I held it up, and I was like, I can't. What the fuck can I do in this room with this giant Kelly in the sight line always, except to address it? So I'm grateful that Emmy was on board. Emmy Pulitzer was on board with it because it's her gift to that space, along with the other permanent artworks that will be there. So it's a different kind of church feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult, tricky dialogue, right? I mean, you're towing this line between almost like, I don't know if retaliation's the right term. There's reverence and respect and retaliation all at once.
Yeah.
All of that's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sort of an acknowledging of like, this guy's taking up so much space.
But also, like, can I eclipse him physically just for that brief moment? Because it is about how you move in space. And, it was interestingly enough, this is a small sidetrack, but Fred Moten, when he saw the show at the Guggenheim, right before we went to do a talk there, he mentioned this sort of weird choreography that my work creates, that the viewer moves around the piece and you get on your tippy toes to see the top and where's this weird hum color coming from. I work the edges of everything, so you peek around the edges. And so there's this thing that made me aware about how much the work is actually really about the body. And then in the context of talking with Fred, like the absence of Black bodies in my work as signifiers, but then there's this manipulation of audience because you want to come closer, and then you want to step back, and you're like, is that a speaker? Is it absorbing sound or pushing sound? But the same kind of dance and having that long cathedral-like space at the Pulitzer, it is about movement. It's about this long walk and then the stairs that go down to the lower level. There's a lot of choreography in the architecture, basically. There is a circular flow in the architecture. So the ability to eclipse or disrupt a sight line, there's only kind of a few moments in that space where you can do that. But needless to say, like also I reference in the book something that was Trisha Brown, the choreographer, whose work I came to know later also, but her performance where she's called Duets, where she's holding hands with someone and it's on the street in Soho, and the task is to hold hands and walk forward with your feet touching and balance each other out in this beautiful way that involves cooperation. So I really thought about sort of that also in terms of what the show on the lower level was doing and how it was supporting this like dance or coordination around my work and how it engages with history. For better or worse, a little too maybe art siloed sometimes in my thinking, but hopefully a general audience would also maybe get a little giggle out of it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask the Kelly time question because it feels like, it's so interesting that Ellsworth Kelly has like reappeared kind of
not intentionally either. Yeah. It's just like, it has happened. Yeah. The Hirshhorn was the first time. Really.
Yeah, you were wedged in between this Ellsworth Kelly and Clifford Still Gallery. Yeah.
Their project room for contemporary living artists was between Ellsworth Kelly room and the Clifford Still room. So making a sound piece that would bleed into both of those spaces and interrupt people viewing these other artists was part of that mission, to really lean into how sound bleeds and it can sort of rupture someone else's concept of view of looking.
you're also engaging the architecture of Tadao Ando. And this is an architect who designed the Clark Art Center in Williamstown, Massachusetts,
Yes.
a building you've been in dialogue with previously.
Yes.
Could you speak about your engagement with these Ando structures and also just share a bit about the Clark project here, which was called These Mournful Shores from 2020?
Yeah. I think the Clark was a prompt in a weird way, like a flare shot from Western Mass to like the Pulitzer and to the Met. Like it was just like, can I take that project and split it in between two overwhelmingly important institutions that's going to cause anxiety for 3 years? Yes, you can. Yes, that can happen. But the Clark was, I think it was 6 women in the landscape, and the timing was painful because it was COVID, but then the timing was magical because it was all this outdoor work. And the Clark is a beautiful Ando building. The grounds are open, so people were able to walk the landscape during some of the darkest times in COVID. So I felt like that was a real honor and a kismet, great timing to be able to have something that generative in the world. I remember when we went to look at the locations that the curators had, and once you're up high and you have the sight of that entire building, I just wanted to crawl back to the architecture so bad because I also didn't quite – I kept making jokes about how I'm not an outside cat, and I don't know why you want me to be in this landscape show because it's not what I do. Like, I'm not going to put a solar panel and have something activating sound. Like all of that sort of extra – materiality that comes with how do you make sound happen. So I ended up investigating Aeolian harps and the call of the Clark's collection, and the Homer paintings are a sight line from the edge of that Ando wall into across the water into the first gallery that you see coming in through that side of the patio there. So it was like this call and response. These Mournful Shores was also something I wrote down looking at these paintings of the Atlantic, and what I bring as a person of color looking at a turbulent Atlantic made me think of like Paul Gilroy's like so much writing and discourse about the diaspora. So when I'm looking at an ocean painting, I'm thinking about these other things that are loaded.
And you're thinking about, as your work so often does, you're thinking about Black music. Yeah. And Moses Williams and Lewis Dodson in particular. I didn't know these musicians. So this is another magical thing about your practice, I think, is the way you elevate others' voices.
Absolutely.
But these two musicians performed on what they called a wall harp. It's commonly known as a monochord.
Yes.
And you sort of did your own massive, large-scale evolution of that, let's say.
Yeah. One thing I love about the way I work, which is kind of like weird, I don't know, just like conceptual rabbit holes that I can fall down, is that all of that sort of juice, what like old Black folks would call the pot liquor, the roux in the bottom of the pot, everything gets distilled down to this like richness. And then you can build off of that and build off of that. And what's the difference between like thinking about a Fred Sandback and thinking about Lewis Dodson? And what's the difference between thinking about Richard Tuttle's Wireworks and thinking about its intentionality, its cultural history, its necessity and utility? And that became like another way of kind of, I always weirdly feel like I have to bolster up my interest in minimalism. And if I can keep finding a richness that my sort of superpower origin story actually has like these tangible, fantastical things, these gifts to offer. Who looks at a fucking broom and says, I'm going to take the wire off of that broom and I'm going to pin it on the side of our house because we have nothing, and I'm going to tune it, and everyone's going to come and stand around and sing and listen and be inspired and joyful,
moved
from sound. It's like that is the core of sort of like Black sonic practitioners and all of their abstraction and all of their complicated histories. Sometimes it is just this gesture that is purely about improvisation with the materials around you and how to make sound shift the energy that might be pretty fucking complicated and low and hard, and how to elevate that, but not for an audience. Not like post-war music industry big machine that we have now, which cranks out.
No, it's raw. I mean, I listened to this Moses Williams song this morning before this conversation because I was like, I want to dig into some of this music, and that is what I could only describe as like felt music.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like almost tactile. You can feel him plucking that string.
Yes.
Like
it sounds also like multiple people.
Yeah.
It's like throat singing. Or it sounds like you're like, wait, he's tapping his foot. He's playing the bottom near the can and he's playing the top.
Yeah.
Like all at the same time. It sounds like multi-layered. But I did use that as a springboard.
Yeah.
Like for the Met playlist. Like that was out of the gate was On Top of the World because look at where that piece was, and Moses singing, I'm sitting on top of the world. But then it went deep into all of those avant-garde composers that are 90%. I was so nervous that the Met was going to get hijacked into this banjo on the roof, pork pie hat thing. I mean, I was terrified for years. I was like, it cannot be this reductive. It's an institution that has to send a clear message about what the project is. And so that is another challenge with just like if the work is so complicated. I was like, they chose the most complicated.
I mean, this is a whole sidebar, though. It's like, I'm glad we have the opportunity to have the time to have this sort of nuanced conversation. Yes. But I feel like your work in particular, let alone tons of art, can just be reduced to the most basic conversation or thing, but there's so many layers. There's so much richness there.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in this weird moment in time and technology and culture and society where all these interlocking things are kind of creating this dumbing down.
Yes. And it's folded together. I mean, when you talk about time, like we can go there later, but like the scrolling and the mashup of history and information becomes just like irrelevant from its context. You're looking at 10 different historic moments in 5 seconds as something else. And I think listening is that way too.
One of the things about your work that I want to talk about today, which you said there's a big difference between site responsiveness and site-specific work. And this idea of site responsiveness, I feel like that extends out of what we're talking about, which is how do we respond to space? How are we actually like feeling its reverberations in real time and being in physical space with one another, with art?
Yeah. But also like responding to like the history of the location that you're in or the building or the architecture. There's so much working in a vacuum right now.
The context.
Yeah.
The Ellsworth Kelly on the wall.
Yeah.
I want to turn to Other Octaves, this other exhibition.
Yeah.
What was it like to bring this show together and to essentially be the curator?
It was like a dream. It was a dream. The Pulitzer, Stephanie, the team there was so supportive and finding works that we could borrow, which is not easy. It's a time, speaking of time, it's a process that artists aren't on the other side of very often. So like loan letters go out a year and a half before, but it really is just sort of like if I could magically think about everyone I would want to invite to have to a dinner, that whatever that cliche is, where everyone comes and sits at a dinner, it would be this cohort of people. And I think what was most important for me, being so obsessed with the confluences that happen in art history and in history in general, is that there's so much crossover. Anne Truitt writes about Martin Puryear coming to her opening, but we would never put them in a show together, but they were in the same moment. And there's a lot of that. We separate these communities into sculptors, into women artists, into African-American cultural producers, and we put them all in these separate places, but they were all in the same historic moment.
I did say I was listening earlier to, I guess it was your Met playlist, but you also made this Pulitzer playlist.
Yeah.
It's called Stay On It. It's a playlist that the title track is a Julius Eastman that I've listened to probably at least a dozen times over the past 48 hours.
It's so good.
It's hypnotic. I
mean,
I think to the listeners who don't know this track, if you haven't heard it, you should go listen to it.
Yeah.
Maybe also if we can get the rights to it, we'll put it on the podcast. Or at least
it feels like it should an anthem for right now.
I think like we should, if we can, we'll put a pause right here and put this track on the episode just to give people a moment. Could you talk about your love of this song and Julius Eastman's music? It's in the exhibition, right, as well?
There's the score, which one can purchase. I purchased it, and I got like all these copies because it was actually for an orchestration, and I didn't really know how that worked. So I got like, it's amazing to have like 35 copies of a score. It's a great gift to share with musicians and friends that are readers as well as players. But it was actually the show with Glenn Ligon at 52 Walker that, reignited the fact that I was like, wait, he should be. And I was working on the Pulitzer at the time. And I did a lot of listening. The lyrics, the opening poem for that piece is never performed anywhere, ever. Like I couldn't find it on a recording. It's usually just the music score. And I was laughing with Glenn, actually, because I think it's just so of its time. It's like, stay on it, baby, But there's some beautiful there's a beautiful sentence that I'm going to totally screw up, which is like, stay on this invisible thread until it becomes tangible, or something about intangibility and staying on a tender thread. And it felt like this is also the timeline thing that goes on.
It's like repetition.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of phrase, stay on it, stay on it, stay on it. It's going over and over again until it becomes real.
Yes. Yeah, but it feels like right now, right? It feels like the urgency of right now to me. We all need to stay on it.
Yeah.
We need to stay on our mindfulness.
I mean, listening to it, and I hope this isn't too much of a stretch, but I felt like I really saw the direct line to your work.
Wow.
That song and the pauses, the in-between,
like stop
those sort
time.
of breaks.
When you talk about time, I love stop time. I get fascinated with songs that have stop time in it, where it's just there's a hard gap. Yeah.
Yeah. Playlist. What's your process for putting together a playlist? Because I think most people, of course, know you incorporate sound and you are a sonic practitioner. But like from a playlist perspective, like how are you?
Yeah, I think with the Met, I was more conservative. Kind of played audiences too with playlists in some ways. The Met was it was not a line starting by decade or anything, but it certainly opens up to a breath where we start with that and go through mostly like Ollie Wilson, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the American Academy in Rome, who was the head of music department in Berkeley for many years, who's a Black composer that a lot of people don't know about very much. He did some experimental work with tape, for tenor and tape. There's some really beautiful works that I just want to share. I mean, I think playlists function like writing or titles or wall text, which is I can be self-indulgent and full of refusal in a way in the work and distilled. But then there's cracks into where this is taking you. Like someone can read a title of a piece that appears to be just a solid fucking form that's going to sit with you. But maybe there's this other path that's folded in that lets you go. But the Pulitzer playlist was fun. It's kind of feels like more what I would listen to right now. Like not necessarily scholarly, but like it's more 60s, 70s leaning, but like experimental, like Marianne Amache for like when pieces were like 35 minutes long and it was okay. Even Arthur Russell or a lot of younger synthy Japanese ambient type of stuff.
Well, I love that there's this like movement happening right now, or like it's been like this in Japan forever, but like now in America, people are like listening bars.
I know.
And there's like this sort of return to the analog and the tactile, and like people are understanding that like the way we listen on Spotify is not the way.
Yes.
You know? And I feel like your work, while not interrogating that directly per se, it is also connected to that. There's this. It's how do you engage the tactile through sound? Yeah.
I mean, that's the work from, I'd say 2000 to 2007 was really like morning analog. It was really just like, I had made works that was like the death of analog. Like the story is that there was this literally a car with the trunk open in Brooklyn, like turned a corner fast and just dumped all these fucking jewel cases of CD cases all over the street. And I go outside and I was just like, this is it. This is what is happening. People are dumping their CDs in their computers, and there's just like boxes of CDs on the street everywhere. Like we're downloading all of our stuff, But what was left was just this carnage of like materiality. Like I don't have to walk across the room anymore. I'm not walking across the room to pick up a needle. I'm not having the moment where I have agency and I make a decision about what to listen to next.
Right. This was like, I mean, I haven't thought about it in a long time, but this was Napster, right?
Totally fucking Napster.
It was Napster.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the iPod and the iPhone. And
you could keep like 50 songs.
Well, I will say that to the listeners, go check out her playlist because they are really interesting. I think I listened to some pretty avant-garde, weird music, but like it was very enjoyable to discover these new artists that I wasn't familiar with.
New old artists. This is the time loop. When we talk about time, we can get into it.
Yeah, new old, or like Jill Scott Heron, I think, who we all should listen to more, whose work I love. The Vernon Spring is an incredible group that appears on some of your playlists. Newer, younger artists, actually, Nala Sinefro, whose work I think is just
I was
extraordinary.
trying to find like who's young and doing anything with a harp or pedal harp. That was delightful to discover her work. Yeah.
So a lot's been written and said about your work from a sort of architecture and sound perspective, and we've even talked a little bit about that today. But I wanted to really bring time into this equation, and perhaps maybe we could speak to a particular work. This is maybe on the nose, but you had a work in your Guggenheim show called Fractured Extension, Broken Time. It's a diptych composed of 2 square panels, each 4 feet wide by 4 feet tall. And I was wondering just if you could speak to either that particular piece or just generally how you think about time being this third element in the architecture and sound equation.
Wow. Yeah. So, broken time is one of my favorite terms in music notation because it just feels like it resonates on all these other levels. You know, I started working with like the slash of crescendo, decrescendo. It's still just grinding away at me. I can't let it go because it becomes something else. It shifts, like lines shift. So when they become broken, when the crescendo is broken or when it's going down or up. So all of this thing about broken time is also like very personally like this heartache of familiarity of where we are again and again, both having micro, macro, both having the same kind of broken conversations about the same issues from 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Sadia Hartman would call it temporal entanglement,
there
right?
There we go.
It reappears and it reappears, and you think it's gone, and then there it is again.
Yeah. And here we are living through, well, an authoritarian fascist movement. Oh, yeah, so here we are.
Well, I think there's this also connected to this broken time. There tends to be these moments that get very heightened, and then there are these moments of pause.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that like absence and pause and rest are central to your work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The fugitive center, as Fred Moten describes it. And there's a certain slowness to your work too. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just talking about the making. We could get into the long sort of slow arc that is your practice. But in a conversation with the critic, editor, and scholar Huey Copeland about a decade ago, you said, I think everything is just so fast and intense these days. So first, it really is about getting the viewer to stop and then to ask very simply, what is that? Can you speak to this a little bit? Because I think there is this, I mean, it was relevant then, in 2015, but I think in 2025, it feels like hyperspeed, like post-COVID. It just, the sort of what is that, the fugitive center, creating these spaces for slowness and pause.
Yeah, it's kind of starting to, like you're talking about with these listening spaces, I think we're hitting a pivot point where people are starting to crave slowness. Some of us have had struggled the whole time, but maybe now it's Gen Zers or something are just like, wait, what's happening? Like if I put my phone down or unplug or sit on the floor with 10 people.
Drink less, all of it.
All those 80s things, man. All it's like high school. I'm like, oh my God.
But there is this idea of like restraint or this
yes.
You know.
But I always equated it with sort of a level of resistance in my own way. I do feel like, one of my biggest things is Theater of Refusal, for example, came back into vogue, which is Charles Gaines' exhibition curated with Catherine Lord. I have the book. I found out that the catalog that I've kept for 30 years is now actually worth some money. So, but all to say, like, it's what a beautiful title anyway. Just the crux of the Theater of Refusal, of this kind of thing in the world that refuses to be pinned down or defined, the problems, the troubling that can make. I've had Black collectors say, well, I didn't know that you were a person of color. I would have. And I'm just like, well, are we going to parse it out? We parse out our aesthetics in this way where if there's not a signifier, one collector should not be interested or is interested, because the inverse is very true as well, obviously. white collectors needing to say, like, point at the thing in their house. But all of this it troubles the way that people, it becomes an interloper in the studio when it should not be. So for the last 3 decades, I've been hyper aware of it, and also just like, no, this is my authentic shit. Since I was in undergrad, looking at a black Kelly, and thinking like, if I make a black painting, it's got a whole different meaning immediately. So what is that about? Well, then what is my relationship with Ad Reinhardt? What happens when Agnes makes a couple of heavy black paintings out of nowhere, like once a decade? What are those anchors about in her oeuvre? And like, what does that mean? Dark corners is what I talked about with the Dia talk. So there's all of this sort of feeling of not just saying to Huey, like, someone pauses and says, what is that? But also my awareness of what the studio is, of being selfish and defining my own methodology and my own path, which has been a one full of institutions, but far from a profitable.
Yeah.
I have to make that joke. I think my nieces and nephews are like, oh, you had to show it to Met. You must be a millionaire now. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works, kids. That's not you do this. I mean, I took it to trash level right there. But after all that poetics.
Well, I think that there is a refreshing thing about you and your work, which is that in a world in which everything seems like it should be so defined or taking itself so seriously, your work is rigorous. It is serious, but there's a kind of lightness too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pleasurable for me. It's like a battle in the studio sometimes, and I don't remember who I was talking to, and I thought if people only knew the violence behind those red paintings, because it's like it's such a psychological thing to make a red surface. For me, that would be 4 feet by 4 feet is enough. It's just like you feel like you've wrangled a beast by the end of it, like washing red paint off my hands and just being like, and then it gets soothed over and coated over. So I talked a lot about pentimenti and like the private expression underneath some of these paintings before they get covered with acoustic material or coated over and over and over. It's labor intensive to sort of get it to that place of quiet. So it does balance out between like wild gesture and then taking that away from the viewer and distilling it down.
Quiet rage.
Quiet rage, yes.
Speaking of slowness, I wanted to bring up 2 sound works, earlier pieces of yours, Slow Birds from 2004 and Slowly in a Silent Way, Caged from 2010. Could you speak to these works, which really kind of riff and think a lot about and sort of improvise upon, I guess you could say, Max Roach and Charlie Parker in the case of the first one and Miles Davis in the case of the second?
Yeah. Well, the underpinning, I will say, is that over this long arc, I really did start with unpacking like post-war. It's post-war to the present. This is how we define sort of a Western art history narrative. And then looking at every single rupture, every decade of who is rupturing this narrative and where can I sort of like get inspiration and juice and like support. And again, this idea of origin story giving me the freedom to do whatever the fuck I want and say there's precedent everywhere all the time. So I was a hard bop listener in the 90s, like Nerd Alert. What was the name of this? There was a show called Bird Flight that was on early in the morning on NPR. It was just all Charlie Parker, like way out of like, this is 78 that doesn't even exist. That was my grandfather's, like all of this amazing
deep
stuff.
Cuts.
Deep cuts. So then I got obsessed with Dean Benedetti, who was obsessed with Charlie Parker and quit the instrument just to follow him around and like make recordings of him everywhere, running a wire in the clubs into the bathroom stall. But it was during the war, so there were only paper tapes. And they were like the holy grail of Charlie Parker because there was a music strike. So there were no records being made, and all of his early formations were not recorded except for this kid. And they found them in San Francisco in a building. They became these like lost tapes. So that kind of made me rethink, how do I get to Slow Birds? So I get to Slow Birds through all of this, which no one would know for a 5-minute, 4-minute sound piece. And I take the first couple of notes of Coco, which is a famous song where he's with Dizzy, and it's like lightning, breakneck speed, tempo. That was the whole thing. I want to play fast enough so white people can't play this. That was like Bird's thing. And I slowed it down, and I stretched the time, stretched it out into this way where it becomes tonal. And what was interesting was he was so proficient. There's not a crack in the tone. His tone playing was so smooth that when you see it as a sine wave, it is completely smooth. This is his breath. So it just kind of opened up this other conceptual way of thinking about like what breath and time signatures look like when you're visually looking at them, when you're editing sound and you see how smooth. And you're like, this is a virtuoso. That's what that is. If you can take 3 notes and there's not a break from his lungs that is causing any kind of woo. And then the Miles Davis piece was just kind of like, if you say jazz, people say Miles Davis. If you say you're a sound artist, people say John Cage. You have to sort of exercise your one John Cage piece early on and get it out of your body because it's just going to be there somehow. So the opening chords of Herbie Hancock playing in a silent way before Miles isn't even on it. He's absent. But again, to change the time so that is 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And it would alternate speakers. So one speaker would be silent for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and then it would move back and forth. So again, there's this like, for the time, for 2004, was like this kooky, what are you talking about even? Which we would say is like a basic, it's not a complicated formula. It's a witty, nerdy formula underneath this, all made in Sound Edit 16.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, Jewelry from the Collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of dozens of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references. Featuring nearly 70 celestial, mythological, and astrological jewelry creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos, the exhibition presents an enchanting universe of jewelry from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as contemporary creations, some of them on loan from private collections. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, back to the episode. You've described what you do as a sort of sonic practice.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, because you've also been thinking about it, I guess you could say this sort of listening as a conceptual practice idea, which was something you wrote in one of your notebooks. What does listening as a conceptual practice actually look like in action? Like, could you describe your process a little bit?
It's perfect. It's a perfect segue. I think it's what just happened. Like I was listening to Bird. It became something that was embedded in my conceptual way of thinking about my work, and then it evolves into a piece. And I feel like with conceptual work, the biggest kind of cliches are maximalist and minimalist. You either take everything away until it's something, or you pile everything up where it's like maximalist. And so when you start listening and thinking, which bucket can I put this in, or how does this connect to either sitting still, being quiet, or being overwhelmed, or how can you sort of figure out how that works? For me, it was listening with the intention of mining material, basically, but also paying attention to how I feel. And maybe there's some things that are just totally untouchable and they're just for you when you're in a room by yourself. And it's not to be messed with at all. So that is the other end of the spectrum for sure.
There's so many different ways of phrasing it. Deep listening.
Yeah.
But in researching this, I came across this quote of yours that I feel like really captures beautifully the sentiment. And I wanted to read it back here, which is, I would say it's a form of mindfulness, a deep immersive pleasure you can have in those moments when you've abandoned your other senses and you are in it. You're listening to something and it's washing over you, or you're feeling the reverberations in your chest. It's physical. For me, those embodied sensations also come with a real heavy sense of conceptualism and history.
Absolutely. Well, I said it better. Man, you can just cut everything I do. I'm better on paper. I often feel like, to that end, like musing by yourself in a room on paper is often better than the public speaking for many of us introverted extroverts. Thank you for reading that.
Yeah. Well, staying on music and this sort of practice you have of researching and lifting up, I would say, a lot of these voices. It's such a diverse assortment. It's not a grab bag. I mean, it's very selective, but it is like, it's from Arvo Part to Melba Liston to Elvin Jones to Ray Brown. I mean, it's all over the place in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
From a time perspective, what's it been like for you to spend so much time with these other artists? Their work.
It's a gift. It's a real gift. And I think that, you know, when I was teaching and I would make references, or you should look at this person, or have you read this book? And a lot of times there's a shutting down of an eye roll. And I would always say, listen, you're going to find your spirit animals. You're going to find your compadres in history over time. You're not going to be a unicorn that invents something. It's not going to happen. You need to bolster up your ideas with kindred spirits over time. Then often the thread is only this radicality, right? That sort of way of time traveling, because it's delightful and interesting, is also maybe just to get the courage to say, well, fuck everything I'm doing, because look at how they shifted things. And maybe it was just a personal shift enough to find that courage to like depart from what your peers are doing or what you feel like you should be doing. To that end, I will say that like the vacuum, not weaving in and out of history and not being mindful of a pedagogy can lead to like the Etsy shape makers, right? Where it was called a few years ago zombie formalism. And that was devastating because it took so much rigor to get to a place of distillment. I hope that you can feel it, and I think that you can feel it, the difference between those two things, the difference between a piece that has the texture of knowledge around it or information. I think musicians also, like if you quote someone in a song and then you take off and then you're improvising, but people kind of remember the echo, the little quote of so-and-so that you play at the beginning of the song, but then you're deep in someone else's territory. And that is sort of like an important thing. I just had this thing with where I worked with ICE, the International Contemporary Ensemble, for the Met. And during the rehearsal, George Lewis, another hero, MacArthur genius, wrote about the AACM, American Creative Music Scene in Chicago. There was a moment in rehearsal where he just paused and he said, I noticed some of you, there's definitely like this call and response thing. And he's like, you know what? Sometimes it's call and no response. I think it stuck with everyone for many days. I was like, this is why like music theory and like thinking about time, thinking about how things are structured sonically are the richest and best metaphors. It's like, so somebody's doing this. Fuck, you don't have to fucking even reply. You can still hold your space in your own way. That was a recent George Lewis idiom, mic drop, because he's really good at that.
I love hearing you describe this because to me it's like we live in such a obsessive visual culture.
Yeah.
But one of the things your work does that I think is really essential to the conversation is it makes people think about that through line of the visual and the oral, the audio, the sonic. And there's this thing that happened when I was preparing for this where I was like listening to these playlists that you had structured, organized, and looking at your work, or at least reproductions of your work in your books at the same time, and feeling this sort of overpowering sensation that would have been totally different if I was just looking at the work in the books. There was something about this combination of the music and you in conversation with these musicians and artists.
Yeah.
And then to be looking at this sort of outpouring of your practice on the page. It was I have to say it's funny because it's like normally I'm not listening to a playlist organized or, created by an artist or an author while looking at their work or reading their book. but it felt like this sort of full sensory experience that allowed me to understand and interpret your work in a totally different way than I would have if I weren't listening to the music.
Yeah. It's like seeing the cliff notes or the homework I did the night before I went to the studio. But there's also this thing with sound art where you don't want to make a soundtrack for your show. And that's also the push.
Oh, tell me about that.
Thing.
Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, I think the work that's at the Pulitzer now is another, and the work that was at the Guggenheim, I mean, I really got to a place where I always give silence. There's nothing that's on a grinding loop because it's just not fair. It's not fair to people.
Especially the guards.
Especially the guards. I know. Oh, my God. But also to make work that leans into the space, work that people can come in and out of. You can stand there for 2 seconds and kind of get an idea of what it is. Or you can sit on the floor and listen to 3 cycles of something on a loop, but the loop is like 10 minutes, whatever. But just to be that generous in how you can float in and out. Like, remember video art was like you see a black curtain hanging in the gallery and you think, oh my God, am I going to go in that curtain? And then there's beanbags on the floor. Should I sit? And like, maybe it's just me, like one of those special people that's like, I don't know how to navigate this. Or headphones.
No, you're not alone.
Tethered to the wall. And then you're like, I don't even know how long this is. Do I have to sit and watch like a 45-minute movie? Like, what is happening? So that push in the 90s, 2000s where media was in the gallery, it was white box, black box, smash up, and no one knew how to do it. So I think like sound art was a victim of that. You either walk in, you're looking at wires and a speaker on the floor, and then you're like, do I stare at the speaker? Where's my body right now? Should I like the headphones tethered to the wall thing, like all of that. So I sort of abandoned that physicality and put the physicality of sound in the work, like either using the materials of it. I don't think I'm answering your question anymore, but the bottom line is I never wanted to make like a soundtrack. So I'm looking at these drawings and I'm hearing this piece because they can be independent.
Yeah, I mean, it was abstract. I was listening to.
Yes, well, you're listening to not my work.
I'm listening. I'm listening to the work of these others, but this work that has held such an important place in your life and practice. Yeah,
that's a different thing. Yeah.
Well, okay, lots of things we could talk about. I think here we should turn to your upbringing. You were born in 1968 in Cincinnati, and one of the things I found fascinating to learn was that your father was a radio engineer. He had worked as a radio engineer.
Did you find that in like an interview?
I don't know where I found it. Somewhere in my research.
Tread lightly. I've had siblings say like, well, that's not true or whatever. Like, I don't want to get a call from a family member fact checking. But my dad was a radio man in the Air Force.
And you grew up like surrounded by music. Yeah. So I guess I wanted to ask like, what are your earliest memories when it comes to thinking about sound? Like, what are the sounds you recall from your earliest days, and maybe albums or music that kind of...
Well, my siblings are much older, so I had this whole universe in the 70s where I had teenagers in the house, and I would be like 5 peeking around the corner or like listening or like sitting on the steps while there's like a K-Tel red light bulb dance funk party going on, and I'm just like trying to be an interloper in my pajamas. My mom had a piano in the house. That was important to her. She really wanted that. I quit everything. That's my backstory. I quit violin. I quit piano. I wanted to make drawings and like hide under the table and make weird drawings or be outside. I was dyslexic, so reading music was another just like, what? But I made up beautiful songs. I wish I had a recording of my 8-year-old self just playing the piano alone after school as a latchkey kid, just making up shit. I'm sure it would be like avant-garde gold. But,
well, I kind of love hearing this in the context of who you are now and, you know, who you've become, because it is so amazing to think in some strange sense you're still the kid under the table making drawings.
Absolutely. My mom taught Montessori school, and I think that, I mean, my siblings were already older, but I went with her when I was really young. So it was the 70s. It was a lot of free range. I was a latchkey kid. There was a lot of self-parenting windows here and there over the arc of time. But that leaves space for the imagination, right? And encouragement. And I remember my mom, the shows that my mother took me to when I was a kid, because she knew I wanted to be an artist. From the very beginning, it was like, that's it. I talked to Leonardo Drew about this too, because he has a picture of himself holding up this, like, standing next to this drawing of Superman he made, and like, they got some prize or something. I have one of those. Like, you're just like, yeah, I did it. In like the 5th grade, I was like, best artist, like a gold star. And to have parents, at least my mom more so, like encourage that. So she took me to see a Franz Klein exhibit when I was in like the 6th grade at the Cincinnati Museum. And I just remember seeing, you know, the black and white photo of him making the work in his garage. And I was like, we have a garage. You know, he made it out of house paint. I was like, I'm getting ideas here, you know. And when I was in college, we went to see the Mapplethorpe exhibit, because that was in Cincinnati. That was the big, and my mom, we had gone there many times and shoved money in the donation box because this Contemporary Art Center was suffering. And then we were like, there's a line around the block because you're mad at art. So what is that all about when you're 18 and you're just like, art does this, it gets ignored, but it pisses people off, but they're like making money somehow. There's people here. I mean, it was so complicated, not to mention race and sexuality and all that Mapplethorpe was igniting, which, not to reference Glenn Ligon again, but his brilliant unpacking of Mapplethorpe and his critique of that work. So all of that was like in the mix. So 70s cuckoo bird energy plus supportive.
So your mom was definitely foisting you into this world.
She was a co-pilot of whatever dreams she could help manifest. And I say that because I feel like that would be her words. Yeah, she was a sit on the floor with you and talk it out. I would say, just ground me. And she said, no, well, let's talk about it instead. Like, if you got in trouble, you had to process it.
So you start going to museums, you know you want to become an artist. How did you land on this sort of minimalism?
Through the storm of the 90s, really. I mean, I think I've always had a strong critical lens, critical mind, a questioner, always questioning, always curious, always saying why. And I think it was very early on in the sort of zeitgeist of 87 through 91, 92, those years of thinking about cultural politics, to read and learn and to unlearn. I don't want to say kids today, but I'm like, there's not a lot of like, we had to read post-structuralist theory in undergrad. Well, I did. And I remember processing that at the same time as finding my hand. And the rip from the headlines kind of artwork I found even early on, just like, what? the separation, the fact what I do in the studio and who I am and how I assert my politics in the world do not have to be tethered. And that's like a point of liberation. And that was actually Stanley Whitney. We had a conversation at the Studio Museum where he brought that up in a way that was like literally the Black Panthers knocking on his studio door to come to a meeting. And he was like, I'm trying to figure out Goya's Red. And that is okay. That has to be okay. You know, he can go downstairs after he solves his fucking painting, or he can sell the painting and give it to them. There's lots of ways to participate.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so on the nose.
Yeah.
I mean, this investigation of form and language, I would say, and line, and how did you develop your poetry, I guess?
Well, I literally started in 2000 making drawings of wires and cables and making drawings of tiny speakers and impossible installations where a cluster of heavy mics and equipment hanging from these suspended invisible spaces. And then there's a departure from like not fetishizing or being nostalgic for the materiality of how we listen, but saying like, oh, well, we listen in spaces and architecture and soundproofing and all of that kind of material.
I wanted to ask you about this because it's so amazing. You went from sort of these 2D drawings of 3D physical things, a Walkman, speakers, to eventually creating these sort of three-dimensional paintings that are architectural and almost sound works in and of themselves. Could you tell me about that? Because it's almost
it feels like
this,
it was a clear path.
Yeah.
And it was like a departure from the tangible ways of listening to just listening and realizing that the physics is there. I mean, you touch upon all these different kind of alchemies, the physics of space, and then that leads to architecture, and then architecture leads to like, how do they do that? There's a book called I'm going to ruin up not the Poetics of Space. That's another book.
Bachelard, it's a great book.
I know, that is a great book. That's like memory in spaces. Yeah. It's modernism. It looks at the history of modernism and soundproofing, basically. It's something with architecture in the title. Anyway, it's a fantastic book because it's just literally about the industrial age bringing in a need to make things fucking quiet. And then dissonance. And I have my personal theory that working class people were used to dissonance. So when Stravinsky plays something that makes people run into the street because it's dissonant, like the masses of the world were like, that's just every day. That's just normal. Like there's this class thing between quiet and just not disrupting. And then there's like noise and noise art. And
right, you've talked about this with the Sony Walkman ads in the 80s, right? Like they did these two different ads.
Yeah.
One of which was all about, catering more toward like a working class white kind of like Wall Street
there's like
type.
a boombox, and then there's like keep the world at bay, like headphones, and then there's just like fucking Radio Raheem, like 10 years later. It's endlessly rich. You can tell I just get excited because it's like, where are we going now with this? Because from like people going deaf in machine factories to like a symphony that's too upsetting, it's just like this bizarre thing. Melody, no melody, anti-melody, tonal, the length of songs being what the record industry mandated that could fit on a piece of technology. So now if a song is 10 minutes long, we have no patience for it at all. Like this kind of weird complication.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You can sign up and join our thousands of other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. So kind of bringing it back toward the present, thinking about your practice as like a sonic practitioner who has, I would say, probably spent a lot more time than most of us in spaces thinking about sound in space. How do you process that time? And I know this sounds abstract, but maybe in more concrete terms, like thinking about everything you've done from, the higher resonance installation at the Hirshhorn in 2013 to 2018 working within the sculpture gallery at Philip Johnson's Glass House or the Guggenheim Museum. I mean, getting to quite literally play in the Frank Lloyd Wright's Rotunda. Mm-hmm. What has this taught you about sound and space and your time within that?
The magic of its temporality, that empty spaces can become really full immediately. That site responsive means so much more. I think when we literally hit the tone live in real time that was going to hold the space in the Guggenheim, it was just like it clicked. Everyone looked, it was like me and the sound engineer there. We just like immediately were like, that's it. And it was just about blindly touch and go with the acoustics live in that space until someone 3 rings down was like, I got it. Like it's everywhere all at once.
Well, and that is a interesting acoustical space. A spiral, right?
Yeah, it's a big giant bowl.
I once interviewed the musician Andrew Bird, not for this show, but for a magazine piece, and he said it was the worst acoustical space he's ever played in.
Yeah. But if you're playing at the top, the sound will drift down. If you're playing at the bottom, it's just gone, right? So, I mean, I got lucky in that regard. But like the Philip Johnson Glass House is a good example of that too, because it was the building itself was glass and metal. And so I looked at glass and metal singing bowls. And I said like at the end that it felt like if I took the lid off of that building and I could run my finger around it like you do with a glass to sort of find another texture in the air there, but that was also paying attention to all the nature that you see because there are no walls. And horrible acoustics, obviously. It's a glass box.
We recorded an episode of the show with Paul Goldberger in there.
Oh, my God.
I think the episode sounds pretty good, but that's because Johnny, our sound engineer, worked his magic.
He had some good backup. That's what you need. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the Met.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about the Met, which is, I would say,
I'm still coming down psychologically.
Definitely like a pinnacle moment of one's career. Also, the last Met rooftop installation till the new wing is completed in 2030. What was that like to build ensemble? And how did you go about this commission, which is an incredible and also
daunting.
Daunting. It's quite literally peak. You're at the top of the Met.
Yeah, it's all downhill from here. That's the title of my autobiography written in my 50s. That's it, baby. It was big and small all at once. It stretched out over a lot of years because there were date changes. So I was kind of carrying that like an anvil over my head, like while the Guggenheim. And then I was working on the Pulitzer while the Met was up. So I had this like crossfade, to use music terms, for the last like 5 years that made me feel a little, because the Clark crossed over into it. So I don't know how to go from 1,000 to 0. I've been walking around the woods a lot. Just like, what just happened? I immediately had to understand that I was not to address 5,000 years of art by being on that roof. And I decided, like, I don't want to say, like, there's a lot of white guys that have projects on the roof and they're not concerned with what's underneath their feet. So why am I like going like, oh my God, do I start? Where do I start? But the musical instruments department forever was like this silent thing, this like all of these objects with potential with sonic potential. And I was talking about this sonic imagination. They are inaccessible. We can only imagine what they sound like when we're looking at them through glass. It felt like an ennui, like, oh, what does that tiny viola sound like? And then, like, it made my concept for the roof more complicated because I did get text messages that said, like, I made congratulations. Unfortunately, there was no sound happening when I was there. And I was just like, oh my God, like a 16-foot sculpture can't be satisfying because there's this potential, right? And I think that kind of metaphor became very apparent. Also, well, it was already in the air from the Clark, like this idea of anticipation. So I would talk about like the lightning fields, like how many times people would drive to the desert to see this iconic piece and nothing happens. Everyone talks about the enchiladas that they had in the cabin. Like everyone says, like, that was amazing. So there's this whole thing of the theater of refusal again, where it's just like blackness is performing all the time and a certain extent in American history. So can you stand still in front of this and not anticipate being entertained? Like sonically entertained, but to hold space and to stand in a proud, elegant way. And that's with a giant gift that plays with the skyline that's trying to do all these other things.
I mean, it's into the break. It's right there.
So, of course, imposter syndrome, insecurity, just like, don't think I didn't get a lump in my throat when I got those text messages that I was somehow disappointing someone that expected a wind song to brush upon them and like near the bar or all the tourists up there. I was like, maybe it was, but there's also 50 people. So it was an honor of a lifetime. It was a fantastic group of people to work with. And yeah, it's bucket list energy.
Yeah, and it's one of those pieces that I feel like, while it could certainly be called monumental, I think there's also something of a memorial quality about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. The floor piece was like marking the footprint because I like making corner pieces and there's no architecture to respond to. It's a plinth. It's a platform with Central Park and the skyline and then all of this amazing history under your feet. So to demarcate the floor like that, and I was loosely calling it a conductor, and that sort of took off into its own thing, that it was corralling these three sculptures by demarcating the space that they exist in and also paying homage to the footprint of the architecture before it's gone.
Well, and like the Clark, it's right on the edge. Yeah. And I sort of love this idea of your work existing on the edge.
Yeah. I used to talk about the periphery.
Yeah.
Like this weird space that's like,
which makes the Guggenheim yet another perfect venue for what your work is doing, right?
I have to say, kudos for giving me these platforms because it is a complicated, multifaceted way of working. And for institutions to know that they're going to help translate and all the didactics and all the editing of wall text that has to sort of say, what is this again? It's I like the trouble. I like troubling the waters with this not so definable, multifaceted way of thinking.
But I think this sort of journey that you and your work take people on is what makes it so special and essential. The fact that it isn't what you immediately see. It is the deeper thing. I mean, to the people who have stayed with us and are still listening right now, they probably understand like the multifaceted, complex, deep nature of what it is that you do on a level that they didn't when they started listening to this episode. That's my hope.
Oh, yeah. But I love this. I love your podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
I was like, oh my God, time sensitive. We didn't even talk about like time signatures or like music notation. Like we could have gone to another level of time.
Well, there's still time.
Oh, time in the studio. Oof, wow. Slow time.
the core of your work's painting. We haven't even talked about painting really either.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've described that you see paintings as objects, not as windows or pictures. And I love that. That's from your Radius book as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely not a picture maker. It's definitely about objecthood and the relationship to body, which is far from a new, it's not a new idea.
Not a new idea, but one that I think feels ever more potent in our world of screens.
Yeah. With so many selfies, why is figure painting still so dominant? It's constant, like, it's the resurgence of the figure again. And it's like, wow, narcissists. That's a really bad nerd alert. Not that there's not wonderful figurative work in the world.
Let's end on maybe pick an artist who we haven't talked about today.
Well, the cornerstone, I would say the gem in the Pulitzer show is Alma Thomas' Red Tree in Winter painting that we borrowed from Colby College. And it set the palette for all the other work in many, many ways. It's a gem of a painting that I had never seen until the Everything is Beautiful, which was a publication. Unfortunately, the show didn't travel. I could not believe we got that painting. Alma would be the one that even in high school, I could say, like, there's a way, that way. What is she doing? Even before art school. So she's the earliest cornerstone that says, like, do your thing. Yeah.
I want to cry.
Yeah. Kudos to these women.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to the studio and talking with me today.
This is so fun. Are we going to have coffee another time in the future outside of a recording studio? You're a hoot. I love it.
Thanks, Jennie.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. What a pleasure and an honor to be here, really. Thank you.
Extra thanks to our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels. Since its founding in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, Van Cleef & Arpels has developed a distinctive blend of poetry and refinement. With its jewelry and watchmaking collections, the maison is an invitation to a timeless universe of beauty and harmony. You can discover more at vancleefarpels.com. That's VANCLEEFARPELS.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest Time Sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Olivia Almer, Mimi Hannon, and Johnny Simon.